Voters in Montreal and Winnipeg heading to the polls tomorrow, but Montreal's by-election has already broken the record for longest ballot. That's because of protesters who are running in the race to call for electoral reforms. Mark Moutter is one of those candidates, and he joins me now. Mark, hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
What made you decide to get involved in the longest ballot protest movement?
Well, ever since I was a teenager watching the elections happen on election night and seeing all the numbers tally up, I've been really seeing a discrepancy between the number of votes and the amount of seats that are attributed in the parliament. And I think that's something we have to fight for because our current electoral system is a massive conflict of interest, where the parties in power control the way our votes are tallied up.
So what system are you in favor of, Mark?
So we want to add an element of proportionality to our democracy in which seats are distributed by amount of votes and not by first past the post, in which the party that gains the most votes wins.
Okay, so in order to do that, part of this movement is putting lots of names on the ballot, which is the case for La Salle-Verdun tomorrow, and your name is one of them, is that right?
That is correct.
And how do you feel about that?
Well, it's actually been really amazing talking to people about electoral reform because it's an issue that doesn't come up too often. It's not intuitive for people to think about the way votes are tallied up in elections. And I believe that the longest ballot committee is a great way to actually gain the attention for the cause because otherwise nothing would happen. This is the first time in many years that we're seeing this become sort of a mainstream issue. And I think that's beautiful.
What about your friends, your family, your neighbors who, because you're in the riding, you're going to vote for yourself, so you'll have one vote, and you're running in the riding. What are they all saying about your decision?
It's honestly been incredibly supportive from everybody. Those around me think it's a great initiative, and the fact that this is happening within the current law, that this is a legal protest happening, is gaining a lot of people to sympathize with it.
What about the fact that, you're right, it is legal, but it is potentially annoying for the candidates who are real candidates and have a potential to win, could delay the outcome of the vote as we saw in the last by-election in Toronto-St. Paul's. What do you say about those who say this isn't the right way to protest, this isn't the right way to push back on the electoral system?
Well, we recognize that this might lead to some delays in counting the ballots, and this might lead to some people thinking that voting is a drag on them. Mm-hmm. But the fact that this is actually being discussed for the first time ever, the fact that we have media attention for the cause, is proving that what we're doing is actually being successful. And it's proving that for the first time in a really long time, there's an actual potential for representative democracy to become a reality in Canada.
What will make you, what is the right outcome for you tomorrow night? Is it for you to have more than just your own vote, more than one vote? Is it something, the delay in the count? What to you will mark success in this protest movement?
Well, we're hoping to get a response from the government. We're hoping that the government doesn't just make it more difficult for this sort of thing to happen in the future. So we want to have an independent body in charge of elections, in charge of how the elections are actually tallied up, because right now Elections Canada doesn't decide in the way in which votes are actually tallied. Elections Canada is only responsible for carrying out the elections.
That's right.
So we're hoping to get MPs we're hoping to make MPs not decide the way elections happen anymore.
You are 18, am I right?
Yep.
So this is also your first time voting?
Yep, it's going to be my first time voting, and I'm a candidate in those elections.
That's pretty exciting. That's pretty cool, you must admit.
It's one of the most beautiful experiences of my life, honestly. Just seeing people around me being supportive and talking about the flaws in our democracy has been a great experience.
Okay, well, when I'm sitting here past midnight tomorrow, because of the long ballot, I'll think about how fun it was, at least for you, and that you got to cast your ballot for the first time, Mark.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks. Nice to meet you. Good luck tomorrow. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Voters head to the polls tomorrow in 2 federal by-elections. In Montreal, the Liberal stronghold of La Salle-Verdun is up for grabs. That seat was held by former Justice Minister David Lametti, who resigned earlier this year. And in Winnipeg, the riding of Elmwood-Transcona was left vacant by former NDP MP Daniel Blakey. He left his seat to go work for Wab Kinew's government there in Manitoba. So what can we expect in those 2 ridings? Earlier, I spoke to David Coletto, the founder and CEO of Abacus Data, and Éric Grenier, a polls and elections analyst at therit.ca. David and Éric, thank you so much for joining us again on by-elections. Appreciate it. I want to get your perspective on both of the races and then ask you a federal election question. Let's start with LaSalle-Aymard-Verdun in Montreal, former riding of David Lametti, a Liberal stronghold for most of the past century. David, what do you think is going to happen here?
Well, I think it's going to be close, and I think a once safe Liberal seat like Toronto-St. Paul in a downtown riding in a city that Liberals usually win all of them could fall to either the Bloc or the New Democrats. I'm not sure I know exactly how it's going to play out, but it's certainly going to be close. And the fact that this is in the Prime Minister's backyard and they're fighting for it, I think tells you everything you need to know about where Liberals' support is across the country and even in a city like Montreal.
Yeah, sure. And this isn't crystal ball work here. You're not on the spot. I'm not going to come back and ask you whether you got it. I really want to get sort of your sense of what's going on there and what might happen because it is a three-way race. I think that's fair to say in that riding, Éric.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what is really unpredictable about it. You don't usually have three-way races in by-elections, and you usually don't even have them in a general election. So you have the Bloc Québécois, which could be making some inroads. There's lots of noise about their ability to win that riding. The New Democrats have a good candidate in Craig Sauvé, who's well known in the area. And it is, as David said, a riding that the Liberals should normally win. They won it by about 21 points last time. But Toronto-St. Paul's is supposed to be safe. This one, LaSalle-Aymard-Verdun, doesn't seem like it's going to be that safe. It is really, really unpredictable. If you told me that any of the parties were at 30% plus or minus 5 points, I would not be shocked. So a lot of it is going to come out of who is able to get their vote out to actually vote. It's a riding with different parts of it. One part where the NDP would be better off, one part where the Liberals, one part maybe where the Bloc. So it is going to be, I think, the one that's going to be the one to watch. And it is also going to be the one that's going to take all night to count.
Yeah, because it's got that longest ballot. I will also say that it is a riding where that issue of the Middle East, what's happening in Gaza and Israel might play out as well. And the NDP candidate has put Palestinian flags on his flyer to make sure that people understand what his position, knowing that it is a divisive issue inside that riding as well. David, let's go to Elmwood-Transcona in the town where I'm from, in Winnipeg. NDP stronghold again, Daniel Blakey seat, but it has been a real fight between the NDP and the Conservatives.
Yeah, and I think there's two ways of looking at it. One is, does the relatively popular provincial NDP government keep the NDP afloat there and give them a shot at holding a seat that, except for a period of time after the 2011 election, a Blakey has held for close to 40 years? Yeah. Or, you know, when we look at polling across the country, 1 in 10 of those who voted NDP in the last federal election now say they're going to vote Conservative. So could this be a riding like others across the country that has been kind of this orange-blue, blue-orange switcher where the Conservatives are making gains with those blue-collar, working-class people that make up much of this riding? That could be a very big signal to the success Mr. Poilievre has had in convincing some of those past NDP voters to come to his side.
Yeah, that orange-blue phenomenon is so interesting, Éric, and it's obviously one the Conservatives are really hoping expands across the country.
Yeah, as David said, you know, they are hoping to get a lot of that more working class blue collar vote, and this is a riding which is very much fits that profile. And their candidate there is actually an electrician, a construction electrician, and a union member. So it's a little bit of a reversal of roles because the NDP candidate comes more from the small business world. This is the kind of riding that if the NDP loses it, there's a lot of ridings like this across the country where the NDP would be under threat. So they would probably still be the favorite. Again, they won this. Again, it was a riding that was won by about 20 points, and we're still talking about whether it is going to be held by the incumbent. If the Conservatives win this, though, that means that they could win 220, 230 seats. It's that kind of riding that if the Conservatives are that strong in a riding like this, there's a lot of places across the country that the Conservatives would win.
So let me ask you this, David. The Toronto-St. Paul by-election was a devastating loss for the Liberals. I wonder if they lose in Montreal, whether it is the same level of devastation, because there's sort of an understanding, I think, inside the party that things aren't going well. And I'm not sure what the expectation is at this stage, only that, as you said off the top, that one's going to be close for the Liberals.
Yeah, I think if they lose it, it probably won't come as a big a shock to both Liberals and observers like us who are watching really closely what happens. But I still think it's a pretty devastating loss. It's not Toronto, it's Montreal. It's a place that for a long time Liberals were saying that, look, at least we have Quebec, at least we have Montreal. Well, if that is proven wrong on Monday, well, then what's left? If you can't win Toronto and you can't win Montreal, and we know that they're well back in third in Vancouver, if you take the three biggest cities out of the equation, there's not much Liberal Party left to look at. And so I think it still would be a devastating loss to Liberals to lose such an important seat, a part of a riding that Paul Martin used to hold when he was Prime Minister.
For sure. And if the NDP, Éric, were to lose both, and I've talked about this on At Issue, I wonder too whether it doesn't hurt the narrative they're trying to build as the alternative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it would entirely invalidate the move that they made over the last few weeks to drop out of the agreement with the Liberals, because that is part of the reason, almost certainly, that they wanted to go ahead with it when they did. It's because they were trying to beat a Conservative candidate in Elmwood-Transcona and trying to beat a Liberal in La Salle-Verdun. And it's a bit awkward if you have a deal with the Liberals at the time. So if they don't win it, the NDP is going to have a lot of questions they're going to have to answer, because Elmwood-Transcona is almost a legacy seat for them when it comes with the Blakey name. And then in Montreal, this is a candidate, it's a good candidate, it's a riding where they have some chances to win. So if the NDP comes up short in both, that is probably the worst outcome out of all of the different ones we could talk about, because the Liberals, as David said, might actually be expecting they lose this. They've lowered expectations so much that if they win, people might say, hey, wait, that's a big win for the Liberals, even if they lose 10, 15 points.
I only have about a minute left, so 30 seconds each. And I need to ask you about what you think the likelihood of a federal election this fall is. Again, it's not a prediction. It's just where your gut check is at in terms of what you understand the parties want. David?
I don't see one happening. I don't think there's any incentive for any of the opposition parties other than the Conservatives or the government to want to allow Canadians to pass judgment on the state of affairs, politics in the country, especially as things in the United States continue to work themselves out. So I am not predicting one. I think it would be a shock if it got there. Although, you know better than anyone, Rosie, that to predict what's going on in Ottawa is hard. But I don't see anyone wanting to initiate one other than Mr. Poilievre.
Accidents happen is what I would say. But yeah, I would agree with you. And those three provincial elections too, Éric, I imagine you agree with us that probably not going to happen this fall.
Yeah, I don't think it'll happen this fall. As you said, the provincial elections, especially for the NDP, they're big ones, and they don't want to divide their resources. Polling has suggested that NDP and Bloc voters are kind of mixed on whether they want an election. They're not like Conservatives that want to campaign. But with the rhetoric that we hear from all of the party leaders, sometimes they can talk themselves into a corner. I guess we'll just see if it was like Jean Chrétien once suggested, sometimes you just have to walk across the paint.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. David Coletto, Éric Grenier. Great to get your perspectives ahead of by-election day. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie.